It was a super quiet evening in a tiny neighborhood. You know, the kind where the houses sit close together, the lawns are neat, and everybody thinks they know everybody else's business. The sun was just dipping below the trees, painting the sky with soft pinks and oranges. Kids were riding their bikes, and a few dogs barked in the distance. It felt peaceful, like nothing big could ever happen here. But oh boy, was something big about to happen. Let me introduce you to Jake. Jake was a regular guy, the kind of person you'd see and think, oh, he seems nice. He wasn't super tall or super short. He had messy brown hair and a big smile that made people like him right away. Jake had just moved into this little neighborhood a few weeks ago. His house was small, with a white front door and a little porch where he liked to sit and sip lemonade. But what Jake loved most was his yard. It wasn't huge, but it was his, and he wanted to make it special. So, one day, Jake got an idea. He thought, hey, I'm going to put up some cool outdoor lights. You know those twinkly little lights people hang around at Christmas? Not the fancy ones, just simple strings of white lights that glow soft and pretty when the sun goes down. Jake pictured them wrapped around his little trees and hanging along his fence. He thought it'd make his yard look magical, like a secret hideout or something from a fairy tale. Simple, right? No big deal. Just lights. He didn't think anyone would care. But then there was Karen. Oh, Karen. She wasn't like Jake. She wasn't the kind of person who smiled a lot or said hi just to be friendly. Nope. Karen was the boss of the neighborhood, or at least, she acted like it. Everyone called her the HOA Queen. HOA stands for Homeowners Association, which is like a club that makes rules for the neighborhood. They tell you what color your house can be or how tall your grass can grow. Most people didn't care too much about the HOA, but Karen? She loved it. She lived for the rules. Karen was older than Jake, with short, gray hair that she kept super neat. She always wore these big glasses that made her eyes look extra sharp, like she was watching everything all the time. And she carried a clipboard everywhere she went. That clipboard was her weapon. She'd walk up and down the street, writing stuff down, checking on people's houses. If your mailbox was crooked or your trash can stayed out too long, Karen would know. And she'd let you know, too, usually with a loud voice and a frown. Most folks in the neighborhood didn't like Karen much. They'd see her coming and roll their eyes. Oh great, here comes the rule lady, they'd mutter. Some people even hid behind their curtains when she walked by, hoping she wouldn't knock on their door. But Karen didn't care if people liked her. She just cared about being in charge. She strutted around like the street was her kingdom, and she was the queen who made sure everything stayed perfect. Now, Jake didn't know much about Karen yet. He'd seen her a couple times, walking by with that clipboard, but he didn't think she'd notice him. He was new, after all. He figured he'd just keep to himself, put up his lights, and enjoy his little yard. What could go wrong? Oh, Jake. Poor, sweet Jake. He had no idea what he was about to stir up. See, the day Jake decided to hang his lights was the day everything changed. It started out normal. He went to the store after work, nothing fancy, just the little hardware shop a few streets over. He picked out a couple packs of those twinkly lights, the kind that come on long strings you can plug in. They weren't expensive, just $10 each. Jake was excited. He grabbed a ladder from his garage, a hammer, and some little hooks to hold the lights up. Then he got to work. Picture Jake out there in his yard, humming a little song to himself. The sun was setting, and the air was cool. He climbed up his ladder and started stringing the lights along the fence. One hook here, one hook there. He wrapped some around the skinny tree by his porch, too. It took him about an hour, but when he was done, he stepped back and smiled. The lights weren't even on yet, but he could already imagine how cool they'd look. This is gonna be awesome, he said to himself. Then he plugged them in. Click. The yard lit up with tiny, soft glows. The lights twinkled like little stars, bouncing off the leaves and making everything feel warm and happy. Jake stood there, hands on his hips, grinning like a kid who just built the best fort ever. He didn't think anyone else would care. It was his yard, his lights. No harm done, right? Wrong. So wrong. Across the street, Karen was watching. She'd been sitting by her window, sipping tea and flipping through her HOA rulebook like she did every night. That book was her Bible. It had all the rules about what people could and couldn't do. No loud music after 9. No pink flamingos in the yard. No parking your car on the grass. Karen knew every single rule by heart. And she loved catching people breaking them. When Jake's lights flicked on, Karen's eyes narrowed. She put her tea down real slow and leaned closer to the window. "What is that?" she whispered to herself. Those little twinkly lights might have looked pretty to Jake, but to Karen? They were trouble. Big trouble. She didn't see magic or fairy tales. She saw something messy, something against the rules, or at least, something she could make against the rules. Karen grabbed her clipboard and a pen. She scribbled something down real fast, her hand moving like she was mad. Then she stood up, pushed her glasses up her nose, and marched right out her front door. Her slippers slapped the pavement as she crossed the street, heading straight for Jake's house. The Queen was on the move, and she was not happy. Jake was still standing in his yard, admiring his work, when he heard her coming. Slap, 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 those slippers were loud. He turned around just in time to see Karen storming up his driveway, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a shield. Her face was all scrunched up, like she'd just smelled something bad. Jake blinked. Hi, he said, trying to be nice. Hi. Karen snapped back, like he'd said something dumb. Is that all you have to say? What are those? She pointed at the lights like they were some kind of crime scene. Jake looked at his yard, then back at her. There, lights, he said, confused. I just put them up. I thought they'd look nice. Nice. Karen said, her voice getting louder. Nice. Those are not nice. Those are a problem. Do you even know the rules around here? She waved her clipboard in the air, like it was proof she was right. Jake scratched his head. Rules? I mean, I got a paper about the HOA when I moved in, but I didn't think lights were a big deal. Karen gasped, like he just said the worst thing ever. Not a big deal? Not a big deal. She stepped closer, pointing at the lights again. This is a neighborhood, not a carnival. We have standards. Those lights are too bright, too messy, too everything. They don't belong here. Jake didn't know what to say. He looked at his lights. They were just little white dots, not some crazy flashing circus show. They're not even loud or anything, he said. They're just there. But Karen wasn't listening. She was too busy glaring at him, her pen tapping against her clipboard like a drum. Tap, tap, tap. Jake could tell she was mad, really mad. But he didn't get why. Take them down, Karen said, her voice sharp. Take them down right now, or you'll be sorry. Jake frowned. Sorry? For what? They're not hurting anybody. Karen's eyes got even narrower, like tiny slits. Oh, you'll see, she said, all spooky-like. You'll see what happens when you break the rules around here. Then she turned around and marched back across the street, her slippers slapping the whole way. Jake watched her go, totally confused. He looked at his lights again. They were still twinkling, soft and pretty. What's her problem, he muttered to himself. He figured she was just grumpy, maybe she'd had a bad day or something. He shrugged and went inside, thinking that'd be the end of it. Maybe Karen would chill out by tomorrow. Maybe she'd forget about the lights and find something else to fuss about. Oh, Jake. He had no clue. No clue at all. See, Karen didn't just dislike his lights. She hated them. Hated them with a big, burning hate that Jake couldn't even imagine. To her, those lights weren't just a decoration, they were a challenge. A slap in the face to her perfect little kingdom. And Karen? She didn't let challenges slide. Not ever. As Jake shut his front door and kicked off his shoes, Karen was already back in her house, plotting. She sat at her kitchen table, her rulebook open in front of her. She flipped through the pages, muttering to herself. Lights, lights, there's got to be something in here. She didn't find anything specific about outdoor lights, but that didn't stop her. If there wasn't a rule, she'd make one up. Or she'd twist something else to fit. That's how Karen worked. She grabbed her phone and started typing a note. New resident, Jake, violating neighborhood standards with unauthorized lights, she wrote. She smirked a little, like she'd just won a game. Then she leaned back in her chair, staring out the window at Jake's yard. Those twinkly lights were still glowing, mocking her. She couldn't stand it. This isn't over, she whispered to herself. Not even close. Jake, meanwhile, was inside making a sandwich. He had no idea what Karen was up to. He didn't know she was sitting there, planning her next move. He didn't know she was about to turn his little lights into the biggest fight their street had ever seen. All he wanted was a nice yard. All he wanted was to sit on his porch and enjoy the glow. But Karen? She was about to make it everybody's problem. And that's where our story starts, folks. A quiet guy with some twinkly lights and a nosy neighbor who couldn't let it go. What happens next? Oh, you'll have to stick around to find out. Because trust me, this is just the beginning. Things are about to get wild. Jake was still pretty new to the neighborhood. He'd only been living in his little house for a few weeks, just long enough to unpack his boxes and figure out where the grocery store was. He liked it here. The street was quiet, the people seemed okay, and he had his small yard to fix up. Everything was going fine. That is, until Karen showed up. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind where the birds chirp and the breeze feels nice. Jake was inside, eating a peanut butter sandwich and thinking about maybe mowing the lawn later. His twinkly outdoor lights were still up, glowing softly even in the daytime. He liked them. They made his house feel like home. But then bam, someone pounded on his front door. Hard. Like they were mad. Jake put down his sandwich and walked over. He peeked through the little window by the door and saw her. Karen. The HOA queen. She stood there with her clipboard, her gray hair all neat, and her glasses shining in the sun. Her face looked grumpy, like really, really grumpy. Jake took a deep breath and opened the door. Hey, Karen, he said, trying to sound friendly. What's up? Karen didn't say hi back. She didn't smile. She just pointed at his yard and snapped, "Those lights are an eyesore." Her voice was so loud, Jake bet the whole block could hear her. He blinked, surprised. "Eyesore," he said, looking at his lights. They were just little white dots hanging on his fence and tree. They weren't ugly. At least, he didn't think so. "They're awful." Karen went on, her words sharp like a teacher yelling at a kid who forgot homework. "They're against the rules, and I'll make sure you take them down." She waved her clipboard like it was a magic wand that could boss everyone around. Jake didn't get it. Rules? What rules? He'd gotten some papers about the HOA when he moved in, but he hadn't read them all yet. Who has time for that? He tried to stay calm. "They're just lights, Karen," he said with a little shrug. "Chill out." He didn't want a fight. He just wanted to eat his sandwich and enjoy his day. But Karen? She didn't chill. Not even a little. Her eyes got all squinty, and she glared at him like he'd just insulted her whole family or maybe her precious clipboard. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she leaned closer. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice low and spooky. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Regret it? Over some lights?" That sounded silly. But before he could say anything, Karen spun around and stormed off. Her slippers went slap, slap, slap on the driveway, loud and fast. Jake watched her march back across the street to her house, her clipboard still under her arm. He shook his head. "Weird," he muttered, then shut the door and went back to his sandwich. Inside, Jake sat down and took a big bite. He chewed and thought about what just happened. Karen was mad, super mad. But why? They were just lights. They didn't make noise. They didn't hurt anybody. They just twinkled. He figured she was all talk. People get grumpy sometimes, right? Maybe she'd had a bad day. Maybe her cat peed on her rug or something. He laughed a little at that idea and decided not to worry about it. She'd probably forget all about his lights by tomorrow. Oh, Jake. He was so wrong. The next day came, and the sun was shining again. Jake woke up early, feeling good. He made some cereal crunchy flakes with milk and sat by his window to eat. His lights were still up, looking nice against the green grass. He smiled. Still awesome, he said to himself. After breakfast, he grabbed a basketball from his garage and went outside to shoot some hoops. His driveway had an old hoop nailed to a pole, left over from the last people who lived there. He dribbled the ball thump, 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 and took a shot. Swish. It went right in. But then he heard something. A little rustle, like leaves moving. He turned around and froze. There she was, Karen. She was peeking over his fence, her head just high enough so her eyes and glasses showed. She looked like a spy or a detective from one of those mystery shows Jake watched sometimes. Her pen was moving fast, scribbling notes on that clipboard of hers. Scribble, scribble, scribble. What was she writing? Jake stared at her, his basketball still in his hands. Hi, he said, waving a little. Karen's head ducked down fast, like she didn't want him to see her. But it was too late. Jake had caught her. He walked closer to the fence, curious. Karen? You okay over there? He called. No answer. Just more rustling. Then he heard her slippers slap, slap, slap running away. Jake peeked over the fence, but she was already gone, back toward her house. He scratched his head. What's her deal? He said out loud. This was getting weird. First, she yelled at him about the lights. Now she was sneaking around, taking notes like some secret agent. Something told him this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen wasn't just grumpy, she was up to something. But what? Jake didn't know yet. He bounced his ball a few more times, thump, thump, and tried to shake it off. Maybe she was just nosy. Maybe she'd get bored and leave him alone. Nope. Not even close. Later that day, Jake decided to water his grass. He grabbed the hose from his garage, turned it on, and started spraying. The water made little rainbows in the air, and his lights sparkled through the drops. It looked cool. He was smiling, enjoying the moment, when he heard a car. Vroom, vroom. He looked up and saw Karen driving by in her little blue car. She wasn't alone, someone else was with her, but Jake couldn't see who. The windows were up, and the car was moving slow. Real slow. Karen didn't look at him. She kept her eyes straight ahead, but Jake could feel her watching somehow. Like she was sneaky about it. The car rolled past his house, then turned the corner and disappeared. Jake frowned. Okay, that's creepy, he said to himself. He turned off the hose and stood there, water dripping from his hands. What was she doing? Was she still mad about the lights? Was she planning something big? That night, Jake couldn't stop thinking about it. He sat on his couch, flipping through TV channels, but his mind kept going back to Karen. Her loud voice. Her glare. Her sneaky peeking. He didn't like it. Something felt off, like when you hear a strange noise in the dark and can't figure out what it is. He got up and looked out his window. His lights were still on, glowing soft and pretty. Across the street, Karen's house was dark, except for one little light in her kitchen. Was she still awake? Was she still mad? Jake went to bed, but he didn't sleep great. He kept dreaming about clipboards and twinkly lights chasing him. Weird dreams. The next morning, he woke up tired. He made some toast and sat by the window again, watching the street. Everything looked normal. Kids rode their bikes. A dog barked. But then he saw something in his mailbox. A white envelope sticking out. He walked outside in his pajamas and grabbed it. The envelope had HOA written on it in big, black letters. Jake's stomach did a little flip. He opened it and pulled out a paper. It said, "Dear resident, your outdoor lights are not allowed. They break Rule 14B, no bright decorations. Take them down by tomorrow, or you will get a fine. Signed, Karen, HOA President." Jake stared at the paper. Rule 14B? A fine? He didn't even know what that meant. He looked at his lights. They weren't bright, they were soft. This was crazy. Karen wasn't just talk, she was serious. She was coming after him, all because of some twinkly lights. Jake crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash. No way, he said. I'm not taking them down. But deep down, he felt a little nervous. Karen wasn't playing around. She'd yelled at him. She'd spied on him. Now she was sending letters. What was next? Jake didn't know, but he had a bad feeling. A really bad feeling. This wasn't over. Not even close. Karen was like a storm cloud, and she was rolling right toward him. Something told him things were about to get wild. The next few days after Karen's big visit were quiet at first. Jake thought maybe she'd gotten over the whole lights thing. Maybe she'd found something else to fuss about, like someone's messy trash cans or a dog barking too loud. He hoped she'd leave him alone. But nah, things didn't stay quiet for long. They got weirder. Way weirder. It started on a Tuesday morning. Jake was outside, raking some leaves in his yard. The sun was out, and his twinkly lights looked pretty, even in the daytime. He was humming a little song, feeling good, when he noticed something. Across the street, Karen was on the move. She had her clipboard like always and she was knocking on doors. First, she went to Mrs. Larson's house, the old lady with the big flower garden. Knock, knock, knock. Mrs. Larson opened the door, and Karen started talking fast. She pointed at Jake's house, her finger jabbing the air like she was mad. Jake stopped raking and watched. What was she saying? He couldn't hear her, but Mrs. Larson looked over at him, her face all scrunched up. Then Karen moved to the next house, Mr. and Mrs. Patel's place. Knock, knock, knock. Same thing. Karen talked, pointed at Jake's yard, and whispered something. Mr. Patel peeked out and gave Jake a funny look, like he'd done something bad. Jake waved hello, trying to be nice. Hey, Mr. Patel, he called. But Mr. Patel didn't wave back. He just shut the door. Jake frowned. Okay, that's strange, he said to himself. He went back to raking, but he kept an eye on Karen. She hit 3 more houses, bang, 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 knocking and pointing and whispering. Every time, people looked at Jake's house. Some nodded at Karen. Some shook their heads. And a couple even gave him dirty looks, like he'd kicked their dog or something. Jake didn't get it. What's her problem, he muttered, scraping the leaves into a pile. They're just lights. By lunchtime, Jake was done raking. He went inside, made a ham sandwich, and sat by his window to eat. He watched the street. Karen was gone now, back in her house probably. But the neighbors? They were acting funny. When Jake went out later to grab his mail, Mrs. Larson walked by with her little dog. She usually said hi, but this time? She looked at him, huffed, and tugged her dog away fast. Like she didn't want to be near him. Jake scratched his head. Weird, he said. The next day, it got worse. Jake was watering his grass with the hose when Mr. Patel drove by in his car. Jake waved big and friendly, like always. But Mr. Patel didn't wave back. He glared at Jake, his eyes all narrow, then sped up. Splash. Jake's hose slipped, and water went all over his shoes. What's going on, he said, wiping his wet socks. Why were people mad at him? Was it Karen? Was she telling them stuff about his lights? Then the letters started. Oh boy, the letters. It was Wednesday afternoon when Jake checked his mailbox. Usually, it was just boring stuff, ads for pizza or a bill for his water. But this time? There was a white envelope with HOA written on it in big, black letters. Jake's tummy did a little flip. He ripped it open and pulled out a paper. It said, Dear resident, your lights are disturbing the peace. They break Rule 22C. Take them down by Friday, or you'll get a fine of $50. Signed, Karen, HOA President. Jake stared at the paper. Disturbing the peace? His lights? He laughed a big, loud laugh that echoed in his yard. Disturbing the peace, he said out loud. They're just twinkling. He looked at his lights, all soft and glowy on his fence. They didn't make noise. They didn't flash like a police car. They were quiet little dots. How could they disturb anything? He crumpled the letter and tossed it in his kitchen trash can. That's silly, he said. He grabbed his phone and called his buddy Mike. Mike lived a few streets over and always had funny ideas. The phone rang, beep, beep, and Mike picked up. Yo, Jake. What's up? Mike said, his voice all chipper. Man, you won't believe this, Jake said. He told Mike everything, Karen yelling, the sneaky peeking, the neighbors acting weird, and now this letter. She says my lights are disturbing the peace. Can you believe it? They're just twinkling. Mike laughed so hard he snorted. Disturbing the peace? What, are they singing songs out there? Is it a light party? Jake laughed too. Right? It's nuts. She's nuts. They giggled for a bit, and Mike said, dude, she's just a grumpy old lady. Ignore her. She'll get bored. Jake nodded, even though Mike couldn't see him. Yeah, maybe, he said. Thanks, man. They hung up, and Jake felt better. Mike was right, Karen was just grumpy. No big deal. But then Thursday came, and oh boy, it wasn't no big deal anymore. Jake woke up to another letter in his mailbox. Same white envelope, same big HOA letters. He opened it, and this one said, second notice, your lights are still up. They are too bright and ugly. Take them down by tomorrow, or the fine is $100. Signed, Karen, HOA President. Jake's jaw dropped. Another letter? Already? And now the fine was bigger? He checked his lights, same twinkly dots, not bright at all. Ugly, he said. They're not ugly. He tossed that letter in the trash too, but he wasn't laughing now. 2 letters in 2 days? That was fast. Too fast. Karen wasn't messing around. She was serious about this. Jake started to feel a little mad. She can't boss me around like that, he said to himself. He decided he wasn't taking the lights down. No way. They were his lights, his yard. Karen could write all the letters she wanted, he wasn't scared. Or at least, he wasn't scared yet. That night, things got really strange. It was late, way past bedtime. The clock said 11 o'clock, and Jake was brushing his teeth before bed. His house was quiet, and outside, his lights twinkled like always. He rinsed his mouth, turned off the bathroom light, and headed to his room. But then he heard something. A low rumble, like a car engine. Vroom, vroom, real soft. Jake stopped. He tiptoed to his living room window and peeked through the curtains. His heart went thump, thump. There was a car out there, rolling down the street super slow. Its headlights were off, which was creepy. Who drives with no lights? The car was dark, maybe black or blue, and it crawled past his house like a snail. Jake squinted, trying to see inside. And then bam, he saw her. Karen. She was in the passenger seat, her glasses catching a tiny bit of light from a street lamp. She was talking to someone, her mouth moving fast, but Jake couldn't see who was driving. The windows were too dark. The car kept moving, slow and quiet, past his house and around the corner. Then it was gone. Jake stood there, his toothbrush still in his hand. What the heck, he whispered. His tummy felt funny, like when you're on a roller coaster and it drops fast. What was Karen doing out there? Why was she in a car with no lights? Was she watching him? Spying again? And who was with her? Jake's brain spun with questions. He didn't like this. Not one bit. He went to bed, but he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing that car in his head, slow, dark, sneaky. He kept hearing Karen's voice, "You'll regret this." Was she planning something? Something big? Jake pulled his blanket up to his chin and stared at the ceiling. His lights were still on outside, twinkling through his window. They looked nice, but now they felt different. Like they were part of something bigger. Something he didn't understand yet. Friday morning came, and Jake was tired. He'd barely slept, thanks to that creepy car. He made some cereal, but he didn't eat much. He kept looking out the window, half expecting Karen to pop up again. She didn't, but the mailbox had another letter. Jake groaned and grabbed it. This one said, "Final warning, your lights are a problem. Take them down today, or the fine is $200, and we'll take action. Signed, Karen, HOA President." Jake threw it in the trash with the others. Take action, he said. What does that even mean? He was mad now, really mad. Karen wasn't stopping. She was knocking on doors, turning neighbors against him, sending letters, and now sneaking around in cars at night. What was she up to? Jake didn't know, but he had a feeling it was bad. Really bad. He looked at his lights. They twinkled, soft and pretty, like little stars in his yard. He'd put them up to make his house feel happy. Now they were making everything crazy. Jake didn't get it. But one thing was clear, Karen wasn't giving up. And whatever she was planning, It was coming soon. Real soon. Jake didn't know it yet, but the answer was about to light up his whole world. Big time. Jake stood in his kitchen, staring at the crumpled letter in the trash. Take action, he said again, his voice a little shaky. He didn't like that. It sounded serious, like Karen wasn't just mad anymore, but ready to do something big. He looked out the window at his lights. They were still twinkling, soft and pretty, like nothing was wrong. But Jake knew better now. Something was wrong. Karen was up to something, and he was stuck right in the middle of it. He decided to shake it off and go for a walk. Maybe some fresh air would help him think. He grabbed his sneakers, tied them up, and stepped outside. The street was quiet, too quiet. No kids on bikes, no dogs barking. Just the sound of his shoes tapping the pavement, tap, tap, tap. He walked past Mrs. Larson's house, but her curtains were shut tight. Same with Mr. Patel's place. It felt like everyone was hiding. Jake's tummy twisted. This is so weird, he muttered. As he turned the corner, he saw something that made him stop. There was a little sign stuck in the grass by the sidewalk. It was white with black letters, and it said, HOA meeting tonight 7:00 p.m. Important news. Jake blinked. A meeting? Tonight? He hadn't heard about that. Usually, HOA stuff came in the mail, right? But he hadn't gotten anything about a meeting, just those mean letters about his lights. He pulled out his phone and checked the time. It was only noon. 7 o'clock was hours away. Maybe it's about something else, he said to himself. Maybe it's not about me. But deep down, he didn't believe that. Karen was behind this, he just knew it. That creepy car last night, the letters, the neighbors acting funny, it all added up. She was planning something, and this meeting might be part of it. Jake kept walking, his brain buzzing with ideas. What if Karen was telling everyone he was a troublemaker? What if she wanted them to vote against his lights? Could she do that? He didn't know how the HOA worked. He'd never been to a meeting. I should go, he said out loud. Yeah, I'll go and see what she's saying. He nodded, feeling a little braver. If Karen was talking about him, he'd speak up. He wasn't scared of her, or at least, he didn't want to be. When he got back home, he made some lunch, mac and cheese from a box, his favorite. He sat on his couch and ate, trying to relax. But every few bites, he'd peek out the window. His lights were still on, glowing in the daylight. He liked them, but now they felt like a target. Like they were shouting, "Look at me," to Karen and everyone else. He finished his food and washed the bowl, but his tummy still felt funny. Nervous funny. The day dragged on super slow. Jake tried to keep busy. He swept his porch, swish, swish. He watered his plants, splash, splash. He even shot some baskets in his driveway, thump, thump, swish. But every time he looked up, he half expected to see Karen peeking again. She didn't show up, though. Not yet. The street stayed quiet, like it was holding its breath. By 6 o'clock, Jake was antsy. The HOA meeting was in an hour. He didn't know where it was, but he figured it'd be at the little clubhouse down the road. That's where people went for stuff like that, right? He put on a clean shirt, not too fancy, just a blue one, and grabbed his keys. Okay, he said to himself. Let's see what this is about. He locked his door and started walking. The sun was low now, turning the sky orange and pink. His lights flicked on as he left, twinkling behind him. The clubhouse was a small building with brown walls and a pointy roof. Jake had passed it before but never gone inside. When he got there, a bunch of cars were already parked. He saw Mr. Patel's red truck and Mrs. Larson's old green car. And there, near the door, was Karen's blue car, the same one from last night. Jake's heart went thump, thump again. She's here, he whispered. He walked up to the door and peeked inside. The room was full of people, maybe 20 or 30 neighbors sitting in chairs. There was a table at the front, and guess who was standing there? Karen. She had her clipboard and a big stack of papers. She was talking, her voice loud and bossy. Jake slipped inside quietly and stood by the back wall. He didn't want her to see him, not yet. And we need to keep our neighborhood nice, Karen was saying. Some people think they can do whatever they want, but that's not how it works. She waved her clipboard like a flag. The neighbors nodded, some muttering stuff Jake couldn't hear. Then Karen said something that made his ears perk up. "We've got a problem with lights, ugly, messy lights that don't belong here." Jake's tummy dropped. She was talking about him. He knew it. The neighbors turned to look at each other, whispering. Mrs. Larson said, "Oh, yes, those lights." Mr. Patel nodded. "Too bright," he grumbled. Jake wanted to yell, "They're not bright," but he stayed quiet. He just listened, his hands in his pockets. Karen kept going. "I've sent letters, 3 letters, and this person still won't listen. They're breaking the rules, disturbing the peace." She slapped her clipboard on the table, whack, and everyone jumped a little. "We need to do something about it. Tonight." The room got loud with voices, some saying yes, some saying no. Jake's head spun. This was about him. All of it? Then someone raised their hand, a guy Jake didn't know, with a beard and a green hat. "What's the plan, Karen?" he asked. Karen smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was a sneaky one. "We vote," she said. "We vote to make them take the lights down or pay a big fine. Maybe $500. The neighbors gasped. $500? Mrs. Larson said. "That's a lot." Karen nodded. "It's what they deserve for ignoring me, I mean, the rules." Jake's mouth fell open. $500? For lights? That was crazy. He wanted to step forward and say something, but his feet felt stuck. He just stood there, watching. Karen pulled out a piece of paper and started reading more rule stuff about yard decorations and keeping things neat. Jake didn't understand half of it, but he got the big idea. She was trying to get everyone against him. Then something weirder happened. The door creaked open, squeak, and a tall guy walked in. He wore a dark jacket and sunglasses, even though it was night. Jake didn't know him, but he looked off. Like he didn't belong. The guy didn't sit down. He just stood by the door, arms crossed, watching Karen. She didn't seem to notice him, or maybe she did, but didn't care. Jake's tummy twisted again. Who was that guy? Was he the one driving the car last night? The meeting went on, and Karen kept talking. She said Jake's lights were a danger and an eyesore and against everything the HOA stands for. Jake rolled his eyes. Danger? They were tiny lights? But the neighbors were eating it up. Some clapped. Some cheered. Mr. Patel even said, "We should fine him $1,000." Karen grinned. "Good idea," she said. Jake couldn't take it anymore. He stepped forward just one step and cleared his throat. Hi," he said. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at him, and Karen's eyes got wide. "You," she snapped, pointing. "What are you doing here?" Jake shrugged. "I live here. I wanted to see what's up." The neighbors whispered, and the tall guy in the jacket shifted a little, like he was listening extra hard. "I'm not breaking any rules," Jake said, his voice shaky but loud. "My lights are fine. They're not hurting anybody." Karen's face turned red. "Not hurting anybody," she yelled. "They're hurting our neighborhood. They're ugly. Take them down." Jake shook his head. "No way. They're mine, and I like them." The room exploded with noise, people talking, arguing, shouting. Karen banged her clipboard, whack, whack, trying to get control. "We'll vote," she shouted. "Right now. Who says he takes the lights down?" Hands went up, Mrs. Larson's, Mr. Patel's, a bunch of others. Jake counted fast. More than half. His heart sank. They were winning. But then the bearded guy in the green hat spoke again. "Wait," he said. "What's the rule? Show us." Karen froze. "What?" she said. The guy crossed his arms. "Show us the rule that says no lights." "I didn't hear that one." The neighbors mumbled, looking at each other. Karen flipped through her papers, her hands shaking a little. It's in here," she said. "Rule 22C, disturbing the peace." The bearded guy frowned. "That's for noise, not lights." Karen's mouth opened, then shut. She didn't know what to say. Jake felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe he had a chance. But then Karen slammed her papers down. "Fine, she snapped. We'll make a new rule. Vote now. More hands went up, and Jake's hope fizzled out. They were still against him. The tall guy in the jacket moved closer to Karen, whispering something in her ear. She nodded, and Jake's tummy flipped again. Who was that guy? Why was he here? The meeting ended with Karen saying, "Lights come down tomorrow, or the fine starts." People clapped, and Jake slipped out the door, his head spinning. Outside, the night was dark and cool. His lights glowed in the distance, soft and pretty. But Jake didn't feel good. Karen was winning. The neighbors were mad. And that creepy guy? He was part of it somehow. Jake didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing: Karen wasn't done. Not yet. Something big was about to happen, and it was all because of those twinkly lights. Friday night finally came, and Jake was feeling worn out. It had been a long week: Karen yelling, neighbors giving him mean looks, letters piling up, and that weird meeting where everyone turned against him. He just wanted to relax. So, he grabbed a soda from his fridge, popped it open PSSHH, and stepped out onto his little porch. The air was cool, and the sky was dark, sprinkled with stars. His twinkly lights were on, glowing soft and pretty around his yard. They made him smile, even after everything. Jake sat on his porch step, sipping his soda slurp, slurp, and looking at the lights. They wrapped around his fence and his skinny tree, shining like little fireflies. "You're worth it," he said to them, like they could hear him. He leaned back, resting his elbows on the step behind him, and took a deep breath. For a minute, it felt peaceful. No Karen. No clipboard. Just him and his lights. But then bam, everything changed. Red and blue flashes lit up the street, fast and bright, like fireworks gone wild. Jake sat up straight, his soda can slipping in his hand. 2 cop cars zoomed in, tires squeaking as they stopped right in front of his house. The lights on top spun woo, 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 bouncing red and blue all over the place. Jake's heart went thump, thump, thump. "What's happening?" he said, standing up quick. The doors of the first cop car flew open, and out stormed Karen. Yep, Karen, the HOA queen herself. She jumped out like she owned the world, waving her arms around like she'd just won the lottery. Her gray hair bounced, and her glasses caught the flashing lights, making her look crazy. "That's him," she shouted, pointing right at Jake. Her voice was loud, super loud, echoing down the street. "He's the one. He's breaking the law with those awful lights. Arrest him." Jake froze. His soda can dropped clank, and rolled off the porch. "Arrest him? For lights?" He blinked, totally confused. "What?" he said, his voice squeaky. He looked at his lights. They were just twinkling, same as always. How could they break the law? He stepped down from the porch, hands up a little, like he didn't know what to do. Neighbors started peeking out their windows. Mrs. Larson, Mr. Patel, all of them watching like it was a big show. A cop walked over from the first car. He was tall, with a shiny badge and a serious face. "Sir," he said, his voice deep, "we got a 911 call about a disturbance." He nodded at Jake's lights, his eyes squinting like he was trying to figure them out. "Is this your house?" Jake nodded fast. "Yeah, it's mine." "But disturbance? These are just lights. They don't make noise or anything." Karen stomped closer, her slippers slapping the ground. Slap, slap, slap. "Don't listen to him," she yelled. "He's lying. Those lights are a crime. They're ugly and bright and against the rules." She waved her arms again, her face red and sweaty. The cop looked at her, then back at Jake. "A crime," he said, scratching his head. "They don't look like a crime to me." Jake nodded hard. "See? They're fine. She's just mad cause." But before he could finish, the second cop car's door opened creak, and another officer stepped out. This one was shorter, with a buzz cut and a big belt full of stuff. He was holding handcuffs, the metal glinting in the red and blue lights. Jake's tummy flipped. Handcuffs? For him? His mouth went dry, and he took a step back. "Whoa, wait a sec," he said. "I didn't do anything." But here's the kicker: the second cop wasn't looking at Jake. Not at all. He was staring straight at Karen. His face was hard, like a teacher who's done playing around. He walked past Jake, his boots thumping on the pavement, and stopped right in front of her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm and loud, "we're not here for him. We're here for you." Karen's arms dropped. Her mouth fell open, and her eyes got huge behind her glasses. "What?" she squeaked. Her face went white like ghost white, all the red gone in a flash. The first cop turned to look at her too, and Jake just stood there, jaw dropped. The neighbors gasped loud enough for Jake to hear through their windows. What was going on? The second cop crossed his arms. "Karen Thompson," he said. She nodded, slow and shaky. "Why yes," she stammered. The cop pulled out a little notebook and flipped it open. "We've been looking into some stuff," he said. "And we got a few questions for you." Karen blinked fast. "Questions? About what?" "I didn't do anything. He's the problem." She pointed at Jake again, but her hand was wobbly now. The first cop stepped closer. "Ma'am, calm down," he said. "We got a 911 call from you about these lights, right?" Karen nodded, fast and jerky. "Yes. Yes, I called. He's breaking the law." The cop shook his head. "We checked. Lights like these? They're not against any law. Not city law, not HOA rules, nothing." Jake's shoulders relaxed a little. "Told you," he muttered. Karen's face twisted. "What? No. That's not true. I'm the HOA president. I say they're wrong." She stomped her foot thud, like a kid throwing a fit. But the second cop held up a hand. "Hold on," he said. "We're not done. See, while you were calling us about this guy, we were already looking at you." He tapped his notebook. "For something way bigger." Jake's eyes went wide. "Bigger? What did that mean?" Karen's mouth opened and shut, like a fish out of water. "Be bigger," she said, her voice tiny. The first cop nodded. "Yep. We got a tip a few weeks ago. Someone said you've been taking money, HOA money that's not yours." The neighbors gasped again, louder this time. Jake's jaw hit the floor. "Money? Karen. Stealing?" Karen shook her head fast. "No. That's a lie. I didn't take anything." But her voice was shaky, and her hands were trembling. The second cop stepped closer, holding the handcuffs up. "We've got proof," he said. "Bank records. Papers. People talking. You've been pocketing dues, hundreds of dollars for your own stuff. Fancy trips. New furniture. Sound familiar?" Karen's face went even whiter, if that was possible. She looked like she might fall over. "No, no, no," she yelled. "You've got it wrong." She stopped, her words all jumbled. The first cop sighed. "We've been watching you for a while," he said. "That car you were in last night? With your buddy? We saw it. He's been helping you hide the money." Jake's brain clicked. The car. The slow, sneaky car with no headlights. That was Karen and the tall guy from the meeting. He must have been the driver. Jake's tummy flipped again, but this time it was excitement. "Whoa," he whispered. Karen wasn't just mean, she was a crook. The neighbors were buzzing now, their faces pressed to their windows. Mrs. Larson yelled, "I knew it." Mr. Patel shouted, "She took my dues." Karen spun around, waving her arms. "Shut up. All of you. I didn't do anything." But the cops weren't buying it. The second one grabbed her arm, gentle but firm, and snapped the handcuffs on. Click, click. "You're coming with us," he said. Karen freaked out. "No. You can't. I'm the president. This is my street." She pulled against the cuffs, her slippers sliding on the pavement. The first cop shook his head. "Not anymore," he said. "You're done." They started walking her to the car, her yells getting quieter as they went. "This is a mistake. You'll see. I'll sue you all." Jake just watched, his soda can still lying in the grass. The red and blue lights flashed, lighting up Karen's white face as they pushed her into the back seat. The door slammed bang, and she was gone, locked inside. The first cop turned to Jake. "Sorry about the mix-up," he said. "She called 911, said you were a big problem. We had to check it out." Jake nodded, still stunned. It's okay. Thanks. The cop smiled a little. No problem. Nice lights, by the way. He tipped his hat and walked back to his car. The engines roared vroom, vroom, and both cop cars pulled away, taking Karen with them. The street went quiet again, just the soft hum of Jake's lights filling the air. Jake stood there, staring. His heart was still pounding, but now he felt good. Really good. Karen thought she could get him in trouble, but she'd messed up big time. She'd called the cops on him, not knowing they were already after her. Wow, he said, picking up his soda can. That's wild. The neighbors started coming outside now, their pajamas on, whispering to each other. Mrs. Larson walked over, her little dog yapping. Jake, I'm sorry, she said. She told us your lights were bad. We didn't know she was a thief. Mr. Patel nodded. Yeah, she tricked us. Your lights are fine. Jake smiled. Thanks, guys. It's all good now. He went back to his porch and sat down, his soda warm but still fizzy. He took a sip slurp and looked at his lights. They twinkled, soft and happy, like they were laughing at Karen. She'd tried to ruin everything, but she'd gotten caught instead. Jake leaned back, grinning. The big reveal wasn't about him, it was about her. And now, his little world was safe again. The cop cars rolled away down the street, vroom, vroom, their red and blue lights flashing until they disappeared around the corner. Jake stood on his porch, holding his warm soda can, still trying to figure out what just happened. The night was quiet again, except for the soft hum of his twinkly lights. They glowed around his yard, wrapping his fence and tree like a big hug. He looked at them and smiled. Wow, he said to himself. That was nuts. The cops didn't tell him everything right then. They didn't sit down and say, here's the whole story, Jake. Nope. They were too busy putting Karen in the car and driving off. But word spread fast, like wildfire fast. See, in a little neighborhood like this, people talk. A lot. By the time the sun came up, everyone knew what Karen had been up to. And oh boy, it was juicy. Turns out, Karen had been scamming the HOA for months. Months. She wasn't just the bossy lady with the clipboard, she was sneaky, too. Every time people paid their HOA dues, little bits of money to keep the neighborhood nice, she'd take some for herself. Not all of it, just enough so folks wouldn't notice right away. She'd stuff it in her pocket and use it for her own little projects. Fancy stuff, like a big trip to the beach or a shiny new couch for her living room. She thought she was so smart, hiding it all. But she wasn't smart enough. Jake found out the details from Mrs. Larson the next morning. He was outside, sweeping his porch, swish, swish, when she walked over with her yappy little dog. The sun was bright, and Jake's lights were still on, twinkling even in the daytime. Mrs. Larson waved. Jake. Oh, Jake, she called, her voice all chirpy. Jake stopped sweeping and smiled. Hey, Mrs. Larson. What's up? She shuffled closer, her dog tugging on its leash. Woof, woof. Did you hear, she said, her eyes big. About Karen? Jake nodded. Yeah, the cops took her last night. Something about money. Mrs. Larson leaned in, like it was a big secret. Oh, yes. She was stealing. Taking our dues. My $10 every month, she spent it on a fancy hat. Jake's mouth dropped. A hat? Really? Yep. Mrs. Larson said. And Mr. Patel says she bought a goldfish tank with his money. A big one. Jake laughed a loud, happy laugh. A goldfish tank? That's wild. Mrs. Larson giggled too. She thought we'd never find out. But someone told the cops, maybe that tall guy from the meeting. And they caught her. Jake remembered the tall guy in the dark jacket, the one whispering to Karen at the HOA meeting. Maybe he wasn't her friend after all. Maybe he was the one who snitched. Wow, Jake said, leaning on his broom. So that's why she called 911 on me? To look tough? Mrs. Larson nodded fast. Oh, yes. She wanted everyone to think she was in charge. Flexing her power, you know? But she didn't know the police were already watching her. Jake shook his head, still grinning. That was the best part. Karen had called 911 on him, yelling about his lights, thinking she'd win. But the whole time, the cops were onto her for something way bigger. She'd walked right into her own trap. As they cuffed her and led her to the car, she'd shrieked like a banshee. "This is a mistake," she'd screamed, her voice high and wild. "I'm in charge here. You can't do this." Jake had just watched, standing there with his lights twinkling behind him. He didn't say a word, he didn't have to. The cops had her arms, one on each side, and she wiggled like a fish on a hook. "Let me go," she yelled. "I'll sue you. I'll sue everyone." But the cops didn't care. They opened the car door creak, pushed her inside, and slammed it shut bang. Her face pressed against the window, all red and sweaty, as they drove off. Jake could still hear her yelling, even as the cars faded away. Now, the morning after, the street was buzzing. Not with cop cars, but with people. Neighbors came out of their houses, some in pajamas, some with coffee cups, all talking at once. Jake leaned on his broom and watched. Mr. Patel walked over, his slippers flapping flap, flap. "Jake," he said. "You hear about Karen?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, Mrs. Larson told me." "Stealing money, huh?" Mr. Patel shook his head, like he couldn't believe it. "She took my $20 last month. Said it was for fixing the streetlights. But the lights are still broken." He pointed down the road, where one street lamp flickered bzzz, bzzz. Jake laughed again. "She got you good, huh?" Mr. Patel grinned. "Not anymore. She's gone now. Good riddance." More people came over. Old Mr. Thompson with his cane, tap, 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 and the lady with the big glasses who always fed the birds. They crowded around Jake's porch, chatting like it was a party. "She bought a new TV with my dues," Mr. Thompson said. "Flat screen." The bird lady nodded. "And a fluffy rug. I saw it through her window." Jake's eyes got wide. "All that from HOA money? Wow." The neighbors kept talking, their voices mixing together, blah, blah, blah. Jake listened, sipping water from a bottle he'd grabbed inside. His lights twinkled behind him, and for the first time all week, he felt calm. Karen was gone. Her reign was over. No more clipboard, no more yelling, no more mean letters in his mailbox. She'd tried to boss him around, but she'd lost big time. By lunchtime, the street was still hopping. Kids rode their bikes zing, zing, yelling about the cop lady who got caught. Jake sat on his porch step, eating a peanut butter sandwich, watching it all. His lights glowed, soft and pretty, like they were happy too. Then something cool happened. A car pulled up, not a cop car, just a regular gray one. A lady stepped out, holding a clipboard, but not like Karen's. This one was smaller, and she smiled when she saw Jake. "Hi," she said, walking over. "Are you Jake?" He nodded, swallowing his sandwich bite. "Yeah, that's me." She stuck out her hand. "I'm Lisa. I'm with the HOA. Well, what's left of it?" Jake shook her hand, a little nervous. Hi, Lisa. What's up?" She laughed, a nice laugh, not a mean one. "Don't worry. I'm not like Karen. I just wanted to say sorry." Jake blinked. "Sorry? For what?" Lisa sighed and looked at his lights. "For all the trouble. Karen was nuts about your lights, but she was wrong. We checked the rules, there's nothing against them. They're fine. Really nice, actually." Jake grinned. "Thanks. I like them too." Lisa nodded. "Good. Keep them up. Oh, and here." She pulled a paper from her clipboard and handed it to him. Jake took it. It was a little note, typed all neat. It said, "Dear Jake, we're sorry for the mix-up with your lights. Karen was not right. You don't owe any fines, and your lights can stay. Thanks for being patient. The HOA." Jake's mouth dropped. "An apology note? From the HOA? Whoa," he said. "This is awesome." Lisa smiled. "Yep. We're starting over, no more Karen stuff. She's gone for good. Cops say she might even go to jail." Jake's eyes got big. "Jail? Really?" Lisa nodded. "Stealing money's a big deal. She'll be in trouble for a while." Jake laughed. "Good. She deserves it." Lisa waved and got back in her car. "See ya, Jake. Enjoy your lights," she called, then drove off broom. Jake sat there, holding the note, grinning like a kid with a new toy. No fines. No trouble. And his lights could stay, shining brighter than ever. How's that for a win? The rest of the day was perfect. Neighbors stopped by to say hi, not mad, just friendly. Mrs. Larson brought him a cookie chocolate chip, still warm. "You're a good kid, Jake," she said. Mr. Patel patted his shoulder. "Sorry I was grumpy. Your lights are cool." Even the bird lady waved from across the street. "Pretty glow," she yelled. Jake thanked them all, his heart feeling big and happy. By night, the street was calm again. Jake sat on his porch, a blanket around his shoulders, watching his lights. They twinkled and danced, soft white dots in the dark. Karen was gone, really gone. Her house was dark, no lights in the windows, no clipboard in sight. Her reign was over, and Jake's little world was peaceful again. He thought about everything: her yelling, the letters, the sneaky car, the cops. She'd tried to flex her power, but it backfired. Big time. Now she was the one in trouble, and Jake's lights? They stayed right where they were, glowing like a prize he'd won. Justice was served, and it felt good. Real good. Wow, wasn't that wild? Let's take a step back and think about it, really think about it. 1 minute, Karen was stomping around like she owned the whole world. She thought she was untouchable, like a superhero with her clipboard and her loud voice. She yelled at Jake, pointed at his lights, and acted like she could do anything she wanted. She was the queen of the street, or so she thought. And then bam, the next minute, she was caught. Caught big time. The cops showed up, put those shiny handcuffs on her, and took her away. She didn't see it coming, not even a little bit. Crazy, right? It's kind of funny when you picture it. Karen thought she was setting a trap for Jake. She called 911, waved her arms, and shouted, "Arrest him," about those twinkly lights. She was so sure she'd win. She thought Jake was the bad guy, and she was the hero saving the neighborhood. But nope. She walked right into her own trap like a mouse chasing cheese and getting stuck in a sticky mess. She didn't know the cops were already after her. All that sneaking, all that stealing, she thought she'd hidden it so well. But the truth came out, bright and clear, like a big spotlight shining down. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often do people do that? How often do they judge others like Karen judged Jake without knowing the whole story? Think about it. She saw his lights and decided they were awful. Ugly. Wrong. She didn't ask him why he put them up. She didn't care that they made him happy, that they turned his little yard into something special. Nope. She just pointed her finger and said, "Bad." But she didn't see what was really going on, not with Jake, and not with herself. That's the thing, sometimes the ones pointing fingers are the ones hiding stuff. Big stuff. Karen was all loud and bossy, telling everyone what to do, but she had secrets. Big, sneaky secrets. She was taking money, buying fancy hats and goldfish tanks, acting like it was no big deal. She pointed at Jake to make him look bad, but really, she was scared. Scared someone would figure her out. And guess what? They did. Her pointing didn't hide the truth, it just made it louder when it all came crashing down. Jake's lights? They were more than just lights. Sure, they twinkled and glowed, making his yard pretty. But they did something bigger, they lit up the truth. Like little stars showing the way, they helped everyone see what Karen was really up to. Without those lights, maybe she'd still be sneaking around, bossing people, and stealing dues. But Jake kept them up, even when she yelled, even when she sent letters, even when the neighbors turned against him. He didn't let her dim his shine. And that's why he won. So, here's something to think about: what if that happens to you? What if someone tries to dim your shine? Maybe it's not about lights. Maybe it's about something else, like a picture you drew that you're proud of, or a game you love to play, or a silly dance you do when you're happy. And someone comes along, points at you, and says, "Stop that. It's dumb." What do? Do you hide? Do you let them turn off your glow? Or do you keep going, like Jake did? See, Jake didn't give up. Karen was mean, super mean. She knocked on doors, told lies, and even called the cops. But Jake stood there, with his lights twinkling, and said, "Nope. I like them. They're staying." He didn't fight her with yelling or tricks. He just stayed himself calm, nice, and strong. And in the end, that was enough. The truth came out, and his lights kept shining, brighter than ever. That's pretty cool, huh? It's like a little lesson for all of us. Next time someone tries to make you feel small, maybe a kid at school, or a grumpy grown-up, just keep glowing. Keep doing what makes you happy. Maybe they're mad because they're hiding something, like Karen was. Maybe they're scared or jealous or just don't get it. You don't have to know why. You just have to keep being you. Because when you shine, the truth always finds a way to pop out, just like it did for Jake. Let's imagine it for a sec. Picture you're Jake. You've got something you love, like a cool toy, or a song you sing loud, or a fort you built in your room. And someone comes along, all huffy, saying, "That's no good. Take it down." You could listen and feel bad. Or you could say, "Nah, I like it," and keep it up. Who knows what they're hiding? Maybe they've got a secret, like they broke their own toy and don't want anyone to know. If you keep shining, maybe the truth will come out, and you'll be the one smiling in the end. That's what happened here. Karen thought she was the big boss, but she wasn't. She was sneaky and mean, and it caught up with her. Jake didn't have to do much, just keep his lights on and wait. The cops did the rest. And now, his yard's still glowing, the neighbors are nice again, and Karen's gone. It's like a happy ending to a big, wild adventure. All because of some twinkly lights and a guy who didn't give up. So, what's the big idea? It's simple: don't let anyone turn off your light. Whether it's real lights like Jake's, or something inside you that makes you special, hold on to it. Glow big and bright. People might grumble, they might point, they might even yell. But if you stay true, if you keep shining, you'll be okay. The truth always wins, just like it did in the story. Karen's trap fell apart, and Jake's lights lit up more than just his yard, they lit up what's right. Hey, let's talk about you for a minute. What makes you shine? Is it something you do, like drawing or running fast? Is it something you love, like a pet or a game? Whatever it is, don't hide it. Don't let anyone dim it. Jake didn't, and look what happened: his lights are still there, twinkling away, and everyone knows he's the good guy. You can be like that too. Keep your glow going, and you'll see good stuff comes back to you. And here's a fun thought: sometimes the people who seem the loudest, the bossiest, the most sure of themselves, they're the ones with the biggest secrets. Karen was loud, stomping around, telling everyone what to do. But inside, she was scared. Scared of getting caught. She hid behind her clipboard and her rules, but it didn't work. The truth snuck out, like a little mouse sneaking past a sleeping cat. So, next time someone's all big and mean, just smile and keep going. Maybe they're hiding something, and maybe you'll be the one to shine it out. Jake's story is proof. His lights didn't just brighten his yard, they showed everyone who Karen really was. They were small, just little white dots, but they did something huge. They stood up to her, in their quiet, twinkly way. And now, the neighborhood's better. No more mean queen. No more stolen money. Just nice people, saying hi, and lights glowing in the dark. That's pretty amazing, right? So, here's my last bit for you: keep glowing. Always. Even if someone tries to dim you, even if they point and huff, just keep being you. You never know what they're hiding behind their frowns. You never know how your shine might light up something big. Jake didn't know his lights would catch a thief, he just liked them. But they did, and he won. You can win too, in your own way, just by staying bright. What did you think of that twist? Crazy, huh? Karen going from boss to busted, all because of some lights? I'd love to hear what you think. Drop your ideas below. Tell me what surprised you, or what you'd do if you were Jake. I love hearing from you, it's the best part. And if you like this wild ride, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories coming, fun ones, twisty ones, ones that'll keep you guessing. See you next time, and keep shining, okay? Bye for now.